think I mentioned what do we expect from this, the outcomes. There are a lot of, if you like, non-economic, non-immediately economic outcomes from working with companies in terms of improving their capabilities, their knowledge, their relationships, their products and services. So, of course, it's from the economist's perspective. If you improve someone's capabilities, perhaps you've improved their intellectual capital, their technological capital, but until they sell something, they haven't actually made any money from it. It's a kind of a cost, it's an investment. But these kinds of above-the-line investments are really important, very valuable. Similarly with when you help companies with strategy, maybe they do something that's a little bit different. It's often hard to measure the kind of consequences of that, except maybe only when you come back a year or 2 or 3 years later and they're still in business and maybe their sales have gone up, maybe they've added a few more people. But at the time of doing it, because it's future-oriented, it's often very hard to get very specific measurements. But as we do look over time, we can think of measures such as improved productivity, quality, stability, sales and exports. Now, one of the things I've been involved with in a few countries, including the US, is we look at companies that have been assisted by upgrading programs, and we match them and compare them with companies that have not been assisted. And what we find is over a 2 to 4 year period, the companies that are assisted, on average, do experience more stability. They stay in business, higher productivity, and some job growth. So when you do control group studies, you can see these economic outcomes. And we also hope for regional and national economic development. I'm going to talk now about 5 international examples. These are models, they're quite varied, of how these things work specifically in particular countries. And the models are ranging from the Fraunhofer Society in Germany and Japan's centers all the way down to some Spanish, US and UK. The UK ones are the smallest in terms of the program. The German ones are the most elaborate and well developed. So there's a kind of a range of activities. I wouldn't suggest, particularly for an emerging economy, that you could necessarily sustain the sophistication and expense of the Fraunhofer model. But I think there are some insights from it, and there's certainly insights from some of the other models around those kinds of questions. So the Fraunhofer Institute, I should say, a picture is of the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems Innovation in Karlsruhe, where I was a visiting researcher for 10 years, and that's where my daughter learned all her languages by being in Germany for a period. This is one of about 60 Fraunhofer Institutes. Now, what exactly is the model here? What do they do? So the Fraunhofers are working on applied R&D, commercialization, and transfer. They work with large numbers of small companies. They also will work with big companies. The Fraunhofers began in the late 1940s, grew in the 50s, and continued to grow. And the question is why? And I think understanding the context of a model of a country is always very important. Well, the challenge for Germany as it was rebuilding itself in the 50s and 60s was that German universities traditionally were not interested in applied research. They didn't like to work with companies. They were very pure in terms of wanting to focus on science and education, and working with companies, no, that's It's not what German universities traditionally did. And that's changed a lot now, of course. But if we only have to go back a couple of decades, and the university environment was very different. So the whole point of the Fraunhofer system was to be an applied intermediary between the universities and companies, but to be very company-oriented. So it's not about pushing out technology, but to understand company needs, to work with companies on this, and to disseminate results. The system is organized as a non-profit association, so it's not a government entity, it's a non-profit organization. It does receive some government revenues, subsidy, which is essentially viewed as the core subsidy. So in terms of supporting buildings and infrastructure, the government thinks that there's a role for that. But in terms of specific projects, they are generally sponsored by companies. So companies pay money to these centres to access their advice and to work with them. It's quite a large system, 14,000 staff, 12,000 projects a year. The kind of projects are, they could be up to 10,000 to 100,000 to 300,000 or 400,000 euro, and these are for SMEs. So what we find is German SMEs are often rather sophisticated, and they're willing to invest in kind of high-end relationships with these Fraunhofer centres, and to develop projects, to do training, to develop some new process techniques, to develop software. So it's a highly advanced system. It focuses on advanced technologies. It requires sophisticated firms. One of the interesting things about the Fraunhofer system is they've internationalized. So there are 6 Fraunhofers in the US. There are also Fraunhofers in Asia, working around where German companies are located. So it's a system that kind of has followed German companies as they internationalize, but their core business remains in Germany. It's a model that is attracting increasing attention. For example, the UK is just establishing a network of 5 centres. It's new, it's not anywhere near as big as this, but pretty much on the same model and from the same realization that you need these institutes and organizations which are really dedicated to the needs of companies, and they don't work either on the rhythm or on the publication or research frontier characteristics that often drive the leading universities. Now, paradoxically, there is a debate in the US about the Fraunhofer systems, and the US does have universities which from the beginning work with companies. So these are the state universities, the land-grant universities that were set up usually in the 19th century explicitly to work with companies. The Georgia Institute of Technology, established in 1868, is one of them, but there are probably at least 50. Almost every state has one or more of these kinds of universities. So the US has had a different environment where its universities have been much more readily able and willing, its public universities, to work with companies. And often, and I'll talk about this when I talk about the US case, universities have dedicated resources that work with SMEs, and it's different from the high technology startups that they work with. That model, has been adopted now by private universities and actually by universities elsewhere in the world. So whether the US does or doesn't need another set of organizations is the subject of quite active policy debate. But that space, and this is the important thing, the space of applied R&D that has some sophistication, working directly with companies, that's the one that the Fraunhofer and others work with. I mentioned when I started the success of SMEs in Japan in building that economy. Of course, Japan has had difficulties in the last decade, and particularly most recently. Okay, and but it still has a very strong base of companies, really strong. And one of the foundation elements of this is something called the Kozetsushis. These are public service and testing centers that work explicitly with SMEs. They're not part of universities. Japan has 180 of these centers. They were initially modeled on agricultural extension ideas from the US, but the Japanese kind of took them. And these centers only work with SMEs, and they're very good in upgrading local SMEs, if you like, to the current state of the art. In Spain, there's something called FEDEC, the Spanish Federation of Research and Technology bodies. This is somewhat similar in a way to the Japanese system, and it works only with SMEs. But whereas the Japanese system is governmental, FEDEC is a non-profit association. And there are many centers organized around industries and around regions where the companies get together and support the centers, and the centers provide technology, management, and other kinds of advice to them. The US MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Program, is now very extensive, 50 centers, 390 locations. And one of the things about this kind of a program that you see in some of the others is that there are offices very close to where companies are. So they may be small offices, 1 or 2 people. It's not a technology center, it's an office. But the people working in it can be engineers, trainers, software people, export specialists. They go out and work with companies. It's a very decentralized network. A third paid by the federal government, a third by the states, a third by working with extensive outreach and field service to work deeply with companies. The last model I talk about, which is a UK model, which is, if you like, at the cheapest end, but is maybe quite intriguing, is the idea of innovation vouchers. And these have been also introduced in the Netherlands and New Zealand and Singapore and other countries. So the idea is, rather than provide a person that goes out to work with a company, we give a voucher to a company that's worth a certain amount of money, and that company can then look around and purchase some upgrading services from universities, from consultants, and from others. It's generally small amounts of money, because nobody trusts giving large amounts of government money to companies in this way. So it's very small amounts of a voucher. And I think it's effective in starting a relationship. So companies that haven't had relationships with technology services or universities or business services, this is a small incentive, a nudge, to get them going. It's relatively inexpensive from a public policy view, but then it leads to deeper discussions, deeper relationships, more fundamental issues in the company being worked on, and then it kind of moves on beyond the voucher. So the vouchers are kind of an introduction phase to kind of connect isolated firms. These programs all are different in terms of their resources. The Fraunhofer is way off in terms of having large amounts of funding and relatively small numbers of clients. That's a signal of being very intensive. The other programs kind of vary on that kind of access. So let me give you, as I kind of conclude, some insights. What can we learn from these program models? First, the importance of decentralized local delivery. The closer you are to companies, the better. You cannot run this from a ministry in the capital. You have to be out where the companies are, out in the metropolitan and other cities. You need to have capable and credible delivery organizations. This is where non-profits, good universities are very valuable. Most small business people do not trust government agencies, but they may have a little bit more faith in a university like Georgia Tech, or in a Fraunhofer, or a Koze Sushi that has developed credibility. These are very regional and decentralized, so the national role is to provide, if you like, some core funding, to coordinate services, to foster special projects, to evaluate, but not necessarily to direct. Further insights, being very pragmatic in terms of what you offer. So you the first thing is to kind of introduce yourself to a company and try and understand its needs, go through some diagnosis, some assessment. Often what a company thinks is its problem might not be its problem. It really works where you go and offer a solution. You have to be very customized. Coordinating with other organizations in the system, also going beyond immediate problem solving. So usually the first problem that companies present or want to work with is not their most important problem. It's something that is used to establish a relationship, and then there's a need to kind of go beyond that and to work more strategically in terms of upgrading the company. Having very competent staff with an industrial and business focus is crucial, and this is an important lesson for universities. Professors are not the people to be doing this program. You can locate these programs in universities, but they should be run by people with industrial and business experience. Students can be involved in them. There's a lot of opportunity for collaborative projects. There's some opportunity for professors in maybe some particular projects, but generally professors are not the people to be kind of spending all their time going out working with companies on this. They have other priorities. Finally, there are issues of scale and stability in a long-term perspective. So this takes time. You need, if you like, a system that has reach and can reach enough companies over periods of time to make a difference. Leveraging resources, promoting evaluation are really important. Let me conclude then with some key questions. Maybe we can come back to these in the discussion. Do we actually, if you want to benchmark your services to firms in this way, do you have a coordinated offer? Is it systematic? Is it recognized? Or are there many little small kinds of programs? Do you have scale and reach? Are you serving enough firms to make a difference? One of my rules of thumb is perhaps if you can reach half the SMEs in the system over a 5-year period, that might be about the right level, so you can kind of work that back to work out what the appropriate size of the market. Are we segmenting the market? Firms have different needs and different capabilities. Some just need some training, awareness. Others are very sophisticated. Maybe they need some connections. Others need a much deeper set of needs. So one size doesn't fit all. Are we providing technical assistance and field service? So the ability to go out into the field and develop relationships. The web, the internet has a role to play here, but I don't think you can run this service purely as an electronic kind of an offer. People have tried that, it doesn't really work. You know, people who can go out, sit in someone's factory, sit in their software company, and discuss with them and develop a relationship and see where it goes. Are the staff capable of doing this? Have we trained them? Do they have the expertise to be flexible and to customize? One of the things these services do is broker. So they don't do it all themselves, but they can engage other consultants, other universities, other experts as necessary. So thinking about the third-party service relationships is very important. Seventhly, are our programs decentralized and linked to local clusters and local innovation systems? Number 8, are we building new capabilities in SMEs? So one of the challenges here is, yes, solve immediate problems, but we need to make some of the SMEs in the system much more capable, much more distinctive. They're going to need much more attention, others' capabilities being built. The 9th question is, what is the national level doing? Is it providing value-added services, or is it top-down controlling and frustrating people? And finally, do we have evaluation and learning functions to understand our impacts and improve performance? So let me just conclude. This is the ongoing challenge. It was the proposition. One of the key things successful economies need to do is build up an effective set of innovation support mechanisms. And it's something that nations and particularly regions have a very important role to perform. One of the challenges, and I always find this quote from Keynes to be fascinating, it's not the new ideas, because, maybe some of you thought, oh, that's a great idea here. The challenge is not really the new ideas, but it's the old ideas. It's the old ways of thinking about innovation, it's the old ways about thinking about government, it's the old ways of the university role, these are the ones that we're living today. How do we escape those and begin to build new systems? That's what companies who are trying to upgrade themselves need to do. They have to escape their old ideas. It's also true for universities, and it's true for public policy and government in trying to do that. Thanks very much.
Buenos días. Domingos, soy Enrique Valdés, actualmente presidente y director de la empresa IS Gestión de Sistemas. Nosotros nos dedicamos a todo lo que es soluciones tecnológicas para la gestión del conocimiento. Creo que es muy relevante a los temas que hemos escuchado el día de hoy, porque justamente una de las actividades a las que me dedico día a día es de tratar de conversar con empresas, muchas de ellas medianas, para poder inducirlos al uso de tecnología en su día a día, en su operatividad, en sus procesos administrativos, y que es verdaderamente un reto para nosotros. Entonces nos identificamos mucho con las propuestas que hemos escuchado acá, ya que mucha de esa labor nos ayudaría mucho a nosotros como proveedor tecnológico que fueran hechas o que nos apoyen en esa labor para nosotros poder dedicarnos a desplegar e implementar la tecnología de la mejor forma, en vez de utilizar gran parte de nuestro esfuerzo en convencer a las empresas de la utilización de la misma, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, hay algunas reflexiones que hice escuchando la ponencia del señor Philip, que quería compartir con ustedes. Una de ellas era el tema de facilitar la interacción entre empresas que trabajan en el mismo rubro. Últimamente hemos tenido la oportunidad en el rubro tecnológico de contar con lo que podríamos llamar clusters facilitados, sea por un fabricante o una marca global o por el mismo sector público, para poder encontrarnos y reunirnos con empresas que o compiten con nosotros o que trabajan de forma asociada en la cadena de valor. Muy interesante, porque de esa forma nos dimos cuenta que ayuda muchísimo cuando podemos quizás tener una forma de medirnos, una forma de hacer este benchmarking que hemos escuchado durante la ponencia, que nos hace abrir el ojo, ¿no? Inmediatamente vemos qué está haciendo la competencia, cómo utiliza la tecnología, e inmediatamente eso nos hace actuar. A veces no actuamos por convicción propia, sino cuando vemos qué está haciendo la persona que está al lado nuestro. Entonces, al juntarnos con las empresas que trabajan muy de cerca con nosotros, tenemos la oportunidad de ver cómo ellos utilizan la tecnología, cómo la han implementado, cómo la han asimilado, y nos vemos de alguna forma inducidos a utilizar. Entonces, nosotros verdaderamente nos parecería una muy buena idea que los programas de inducción de innovación tecnológica en nuestro país incluyan ese componente, que traten de formar estos clústeres, estos grupos, en un nivel de granularidad bastante alto, porque hoy en día sabemos que existen gremios de muchos tipos, pero acá nos referimos a tener agrupaciones de empresas que trabajan en rubros muy similares, ¿no? Esa es una de las reflexiones que hice. Otra es en el tema de capacitación. Como les comenté anteriormente, nos cuesta mucho convencer a las empresas a que utilicen e inviertan en proyectos de tecnología. Por lo tanto, nosotros veíamos con muy buenos ojos que programas del Estado, programas de este tipo de inducción tecnológica nos apoyen en capacitar a los empresarios nacionales a cuáles son los beneficios de adoptar e invertir y tomar riesgos en tecnología, ¿no? Eso sería de mucha ayuda para nosotros, sería un estímulo que ayudaría a la implantación de tecnologías y ver los beneficios. Un tema que leí recientemente que me llamó mucho la atención es, por ejemplo, que en el Perú 40% de los gerentes de tecnología, de sistemas, ¿no?, jefaturas de sistemas, no reportan directamente a la gerencia general de la empresa, sino reportan más bien a una gerencia administrativa, financiera en muchos casos, o de operaciones. Y estos gerentes, bueno, como es de entenderse, no ven realmente la tecnología como un activo estratégico de la empresa. Entonces ahí nomás ya nos damos cuenta de el trabajo que tenemos que hacer para lograr que las empresas adopten la tecnología. Y finalmente, otra reflexión que hice, estuve leyendo algo durante el fin de semana en preparación para el día de hoy, y me topé con un artículo muy interesante sobre un programa que se está desarrollando en Chile, que se llama Startup Chile, Inicio Chile. No sé si lo habrán escuchado, está en el internet, muy bien publicado. Me llamó mucho la atención porque su enfoque es en la gente y no tanto en la industria. ¿Y a qué se refiere la gente? Que su propuesta, que ya la empezaron a implementar, es importar a 1000 empresarios seleccionados de entre los empresarios que utilizan muy bien la innovación tecnológica en otros países y darles un incentivo de $40.000 para poder iniciar empresas pequeñas en Chile. Y ya están avanzando bastante rápido. Entonces eso incentiva muy rápidamente a que los locales vean cómo se utiliza la tecnología a nivel empresarial. Que de modo esas son las 13 reflexiones que hice con respecto a la ponencia. Muchísimas gracias por su atención.